you can be leaning over somebody's shoulder, like watching what they're doing. And now you've got two people doing the same job, basically. And one thing which I've had to learn, and actually this came through having children, believe it or not, this lesson, was patience. Like watching children learn, and I know adults are very different, but watching children learn, you have to learn a whole other level of patience, and also like curiosity to understand, like, I wonder why they're thinking about it like that way. And then you have that moment of like, right, now I get it. So you give people the space to the freedom to be able to roam, and you give them a brief, but don't micromanage them. They can do some really amazing creative things, and you can actually learn a heck of a lot from it.
Are you finding fulfillment in your career or business? If not, this is probably the episode for you, whether that's because of a growth or revenue issue, or just because you're stuck, you're burnt out, you're not doing the thing that you love to do. We'll be talking about that topic today. I'm joined by my guest, Robin Waite. He's the founder of Fearless Business. He's a regular speaker at various business events. He's the best-selling author of several books, including his latest, which is called Take Your Shot, apparently also his most popular. Robin has 2 decades of experience in various companies, and he puts that experience to work. He helps clients, he helps business owners, possibly like you, to reach goals, create more time, and increase revenue. Today we'll be talking about things such as business planning, the role of education, mindset, leadership, the perils of micromanaging, and many more besides. It's all very relevant to a business owner, equally relevant to a leader, manager, or aspiring entrepreneur as well. And it's just a genuinely enjoyable chat as well. So I hope you find that as much as I do. You're definitely going to learn something. I certainly did. I'll be putting it into practice in my own business as well. So thank you, Robin, before we start. And without further ado, let's welcome him to the show.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Robin, welcome to Leading with Integrity. Great to have you on the show. Looking forward to this conversation because I know it's going to be interesting and energetic, no doubt.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, David, for inviting me onto it. And likewise, been very excited to sit down and chat.
Absolutely. Well, I'm standing up, but never mind. So best place to start, as I do every week, is over to you for a little bit, really. Tell the listeners or the viewers a bit about yourself, your business, your career so far, what you do and why you do it.
Yeah, so I'll try and keep it relatively potted because, believe it or not, I've been in business for 20 plus years. I know it might not necessarily look like it, but I've got a few more grey hairs in my beard since I first started out. So I originally left uni and did a systems analysis job for several years for a medical company. Pretty much, I think during that time, learned everything that you shouldn't do in a business, because whilst the owner of the business was like amazing when it came to, he's a great person, brilliant when it came to product design, but literally just had no idea about how to run a business. And, you know, you're taking like $1.5 million revenue and not coming out with any profit. And I was like, I'm sure I could do a better job than that. So I started my first business, which was a marketing agency way back in 2004, ran that very successfully for 12 years, and then got to around about 2016 and I was between daughters. So my youngest daughter was about to be born. We had 2 planned cesareans. And about 3 weeks before that due date, I had a bit of a mental breakdown and ended up leaving the agency. I just realized in a moment that I was incredibly unfulfilled. You know, it was successful. We were doing about £250,000 revenue. I had a small team of 3 or 4 people. We had about 180 clients. But ultimately what it came down to was I just, you know, almost got to a point where it wasn't just like the Sunday night dread. It was the Monday night, the Tuesday night, the Wednesday night, and the Thursday night dread, you know, of having to go into the office and be responsible for all of these people, basically. When really all I wanted to do is just desperate to spend a bit more time with my family. So I closed the agency down originally, and then somebody heard that I was shutting it, came in and made me a sort of modest offer for the client base and a bit of intellectual property I created. That gave me a bit of time just to spend with the family, rethink my direction in my career, started networking and was telling people about this journey I'd been on with my agency and that I'd sold it. And then people started offering me, free coffee and cake to come and pick my brains about, so they could learn how to start and scale and potentially sell a business. So I did some informal mentoring for a few months and then gradually sort of made this transition into business coaching, which is obviously what I do now. And at the moment, we work primarily with small grassroots one-person businesses, typically coaches, consultants, and freelancers, because that's been a majority of my sort of background and career over the last 20 years. And then my sort of real sweet spot is around pricing and money mindset, which I think is something we might end up digging into a bit today. And sort of around that, then I love my cycling and my surfing, sort of trying to be a bit outdoorsy and spending time with my family. I have a couple of side hustle businesses, which I've grown over the last few years as well, alongside my main business, because as a business coach, you've got to practice what you preach as well and teach other people. So, we've launched a second business now, which has already hit 6 figures, which is sort of really exciting. And it's been very organic. So, and it's quite nice because it's quite different to my coaching practice. So it's great that I'm able to apply my knowledge to a different business.
So lots of spinning plates then. Yeah.
Well, one or two. I mean, the good thing is with that side project, there's a guy which I hired about 7 or 8 months ago, Tate, and he's just absolutely brilliant. I was able to kind of give him the blueprint for the business, and he runs it on a day-to-day basis. So it means that I can focus on sort of the coaching practice and my clients within that, and doing things like this, obviously, to promote it. It's quite good. The other business, it was designed intentionally to be sort of a very boring, systemized business that somebody else could just run with very little input from myself.
Nice. Yeah. And so, I mean, 2016, so you did the Great Resignation before it was cool, I guess.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Well, I kind of handed the resignation letter into myself, really, being my own boss. So, but yeah, it was a weird experience, actually. It's a bit of a backstory. So I was out on a Sunday morning with my cycling buddies, and I went down this categorized climb at 52.5 miles an hour. And then at the bottom of the hill, all of a sudden I just broke down in floods of tears. And when, the guys are like, "You all right, Rob?" Seems like, and I was like, "It's fine. Just go and get the coffee and cake at the cafe. I'll come and meat you there." There's a theme here, by the way, David, you'll see. Get your coffee and cake kind of buys you a lot of my time. So I kind of just took a few moments to contemplate and figure out kind of what was going on there. And I realized it wasn't just like an immediate thing. I woke up one morning and then all of a sudden I was like really unhappy. It's a bit like sleep debt. Unhappiness debt, I think, builds in the same way. It was a gradual process over about 12 or 18 months. And then it culminated. It transpired. I had about depression, so got diagnosed. But obviously I just needed this big sort of transition in my career because, agency life is an interesting one. I don't know how much you know about it, but typically it's like, and you've got 180 clients. They're basically having 180 bosses all asking for stuff at the same time. Lots of, pull a lot of all-nighters to kind of get projects over the line so you don't miss deadlines. We had a very young team as well, so they're quite green. So they were a big draw on my life, on sort of my time. And it just makes you reevaluate kind of what it is that you want to get out of life.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned the Great Resignation jokingly, but actually, I mean, there's a lot of parallels in that story and the sort of stories you hear from people who were part of that, who left their jobs during the pandemic for whatever reason. But this idea of like lacking that fulfillment, not really enjoying it, the Sunday night angst, like for me, it was headaches. And again, for me, it was also way before COVID or the Great Resignation as well. But
yeah,
that's another story that everyone's heard before. And it's yeah, I mean, and then something else that we talked about, we spent a month talking about burnout last year, for example. And again, there's some common themes emerging there about all these different demands on your time and not having enough to do things that you actually enjoy, things that you want to do, like spending time with your family, for example, or doing a business that you're actually enjoying as well. So yeah, I mean, it's good. In a way, it's good. In another way, it's a bit sad, I suppose, to hear it from that other perspective and that different kind of organisation.
There's a statistic actually, which I read recently where I think it was around about 40% of people are unhappy in their current job. Imagine that. And that's not just, careers and corporate. This is also business owners as well. Imagine that 40% of people, that's tens of millions of people waking up every day just feeling miserable because of where they've ended up. And I just think that's really sad. I was fortunate that being self-employed, you kind of have just a touch more freedom to be able to choose to do what you want to do. And I think sometimes when you're in a job and you have to collect that paycheck at the end of the month and your family needs you to bring in the money to pay the mortgage or put food on the table for your kids, I feel there is a certain element of kind of being trapped within that as well. But I don't think corporates really help themselves that much. So I'm very fortunate. I can see both sides of the coin. My wife's a lawyer and she works for one of the top 10 law firms in the UK. I won't name them because it would be very unprofessional.
Don't want to get her in trouble. No.
However, it always boggles me, right? So they have this big well-being thing within her organization. And there's thousands of employees in this business, of course. And every now and then, periodically, it's about once every 6 months or something, they do a well-being day. But lawyers are very much, they have time recording targets to meet, billable hours and things like that. So they get a day for well-being, but then they have to claw back their 6.5 hours that they weren't billing for on their well-being day. And it's like, how is that good for somebody's well-being? It's like, if you're going to force them to have a well-being day, at least take the time off their target for that month. So I don't think corporates really do themselves many favors in that respect.
That reminds me of one of the most convincing criticisms I've seen of this unlimited annual leave policy that's been fairly fashionable, I think, of late. It's the same thing in practice, isn't it? Because, you could take as much time off as you like and we encourage you to do it. However, you've still got to meet all of these targets. And realistically, if you take more than 20 days a year, you're never going to do that. Therefore, nobody actually uses it. And I've seen a couple of statistics being quoted that actually, in the majority of cases where they have that policy, people end up taking less leave than they would if they just had, say, a standard, 24, 25 days a year. And that was interesting and also quite sad as well.
Which I guess, is there a bit of reverse psychology going on there? Maybe we're being really kind and generous to you, and so you kind of feel guilted into over delivering as an employee. I don't know. I bet there's probably some psychology behind it.
Yeah, or just like the assumption that they'll still be watching, and if you take too much, they're going to know, kind of thing. Yeah. I don't know. I'd love to know if there's differences between countries and what national culture plays a role in that as well.
Well, interesting. So this isn't, I'm by no means an expert on this, but I keep up to sort of date with the news and things like that. But I think it's Sweden. Certainly one of the Scandinavian countries has now gone to a 4-day working week. And condensed hours has been shown to be quite effective, especially for sort of young parents, which, let's face it, that's mostly women, especially in sort of admin related jobs like, lawyers and things like that. But they've proven that, people are as productive, if not even more productive, working 4 days a week. It's one of the things which I've kind of embraced into my own sort of small business now is that, I don't work Fridays as a rule. If I do come into my office and want to catch up on a few things, I give myself the flexibility of choice to be able to do that. But most of the time now, I've just got into the habit of enjoying that, a bit of guilt-free time off, going into, Cheltenham to go and get my hair cut, or there's a local spa where I'll go up and get a massage, or go up and have a quiet cup of coffee, and just write for the morning or something like that. And I think big businesses need to kind of learn something from that. A story. So I've got an anecdote actually. So when I first stepped into coaching, I was trying to decide on who it was that I wanted to work with. So experimented quite a bit with the types and size of clients I worked with. And one of my early clients was, funny enough, actually, it was a local law firm, but they had about 160 employees there. And they were losing somewhere in the region about 20 to 25% of their staff every year, obviously mostly solicitors. And they wanted me to come in and do a bit of coaching work with a team as a pilot program to try and figure out why they had such a dirge of people leaving their business, basically. The first thing that was I blew my mind. I asked the HR director if she knew how much it was costing them every time a solicitor left. She had no idea. So we did a quick sort of, beer mat calculation and worked out, partner time for training and a 2-year training contract and all of the other admin resources, overheads that were associated with that 2 years. And it came to close to £200,000 to replace each solicitor. Multiply that on the worst year by 40 people, and you can do the maths on that. It was a very expensive problem which they had. So when I went in to do the pilot program, one of the first exercises I invited the team to do, and it was split. There was about 13, 14 in total, 2 partners, nearly all female. One of the partners was male, but everybody else in the team was female. And they were split kind of down the middle with admin staff and then fee earning staff. So to give a bit of context. And I said, right, we're doing an exercise. I want you all to just write down and then we'll go around and share your goals. And I didn't elaborate on it. I kept it broad just to see where they would go with it. And of course, they all wrote down all of the business goals. So I said, okay, great. So we're all aware mostly of what the business goals are. I get that in KPIs and your time recording. Understand, makes sense. What about your personal goals? Why don't you write those down and then share them with me? 4 of them couldn't even, 3 of them broke down in tears, and one was so stuck, she couldn't even speak. She couldn't even read out her personal goals. And so there was a break coming up. So I got the opportunity to go around and just speak to each of them. And one of them, she'd been at this firm for, 20 plus years, 23 years or something like that. And she said, thank you, Robin, for asking me that, because nobody has ever asked us what our personal goals are in this business. I was like, in 23 years? She's like, yeah, they don't care. It transpired the person who was basically just shut down in that session. I spoke to the partners about her. I didn't actually get to speak to her directly, but it transpired that she had broken up with her boyfriend. She, as a result of that, and the whole situation, smashed up her car, had to move back in with her parents, obviously had to take out a loan now to go and get her. So she just massively was underperforming, but it was down to this just like circumstances in her life, which you gotta, it's hard when those personal things impact a business. I get it, right? And businesses have objectives and they can't have underperformers in there. But she'd gone from being one of their highest performers, and then with this catastrophe of stuff going on, like ended up being one of the lowest performers. And and again, I won't name them because again, it wouldn't be fair, but they shared that apparently they've been invited to manage her out of the business because of all of this. And I said, well, now you've told me that you can't do that because that's basically illegal. And we need to put together a plan, because I bet she's just one that we found. I bet out of the 160 employees, there's like a dozen of her or 20 of her with all of this stuff going on. Like, what are you actually doing to support these people? And thankfully, kind of they intervened. She ended up becoming back to one of the top performers in the business, and so it went on. But I think sadly, a lot of bigger businesses, they get to a certain size and they forget that we're humans, like we're people, and we have good times, we have bad times, and we kind of need support through both, and encouragement through both. And there's a lot that businesses can do. Simple things like. There's some amazing mentoring, therapy and coaching subscriptions which you can get, so that when your team are going through tough times, for not a huge amount of money, you can give them a telephone number to call and they can get any support which they need. There's medical care, insurance, which isn't that expensive to have private healthcare, so that when you think about it, if you can help somebody feel better about themselves, get better if they've got a physical or emotional, or well-being issue, and they can get back to work sooner and be happier at work, ultimately they're going to be more productive. So this isn't a cost. This is an investment in your staff. And I think even more so, like it's a bit of a showing off a little bit, but I went to Dubai at the start of the year on business. So after we got through Christmas and New Year and stuff, and I did feel a bit guilty about it, but, and then coming back, I'd basically not worked in my business from the 18th of December all the way through to the 14th of January. And I flew back in on Tuesday morning, straight into work in my little studio here in the Cotswolds. Got to Friday and I was due to be meeting a friend of mine for coffee that morning, and it didn't happen for one reason or another. And I was like crawling up the walls, and I realized my wife's like, what on earth is wrong with you, Rob? Like I was like, I haven't seen anybody since Tuesday. like physically. I've done lots of calls, but sitting down and actually seeing somebody in 3D. And even then, it's just a little reminder of like, actually, your well-being is so important. And if you're isolated, especially working from home, it can have a massive negative impact.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Even as a business owner, I've chosen this life. It's not like I'm an employee
same.
Forced, have it forced on them.
Yeah. I mean, I've always been fairly self-reliant and kind of comfortable in my own company. But even I, like working alone, I mean, my other half is here. She works from home 3 days out of the week. But even then, 2 days out of the week. I do have moments where I'm just like, I haven't seen anyone for a while. I should probably go and do that. Yeah. So going back to your other story that you shared there, I mean, thank you, because I mean, first of all, I massively agree with every point of view you've expressed there. And to me, this is what modern leadership is about, and it's that difference that it makes versus not. I think the most powerful part of that story for me was what happened next after that issue was flagged, and the end of the story was she became one of their highest performers again. And that for me is the lesson that all of these companies should be taking from that kind of situation, because, and you're right, once they get to a certain size, I don't know if it's that they forget or if it's a more deliberate, maybe cynical decision that, well, we're big enough now that it doesn't matter. People are always going to want to work for us because we're perceived as important and big in the market. And so we don't really need to try that sort of thing. Or if maybe it's a bit of both. I don't know, but.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, again, through my experience with the businesses which I've had the opportunity to work with, the bigger businesses, it's a theme which comes up quite often is like, who do you hire? What skills do you hire for? Like, why do you hire them, etc. So there's all of those questions. And time again, people make the same observation that if you take 10 employees, generally you end up with 2 A players who are great. You end up with 6 B players who are kind of okay to moderate, and then 2 C players who you want to get rid of. And I do think there's a lot of corporates, again, who will cycle through people to find their A team. I mean, obviously you want the best people working within your business as well. But that does unfortunately lead longer term to there being, if you have a very high turnover of staff because of that, it can become a very toxic, workplace environment to work at. So yeah, you end up with a great workforce, very talented, getting great results, but they're all, again, miserable because all of their friends come and go, and that's it.
Yeah, and I feel like there's not enough emphasis on what it is that's making those people A, B, or C players, because so often I think that's contextual. Maybe it's just not the right place for them. In which case, fine, there's nothing wrong with moving them on as long as you do it mutual breakup. I don't know, but with kindness, like help them find the next thing at least. Do something like that goes above and beyond. Yeah, and the other thing I was going to mention as well about the 4-day week. I love that idea. I can't quite bring myself to do it for myself in my own company by myself, but at an industry level, I mean, it's being talked about right now, I think, in government, isn't it? I saw a headline this morning, I think, about that being on the agenda. You're right. It's proven that it's more productive. And I think, thinking back to some of the jobs I've had in the past, and I'm sure everyone can identify with this, like, yeah, you were there for 5 days, 9 to 5. Are you spending all of that time being as productive as you possibly could? No. If you had one less day a week, would you work harder in those 4 and achieve the same results? I think you would. Of course you would. I mean, the scientific evidence is there, isn't it?
You'd naturally be more motivated and energized because you've had a 3-day weekend potentially, or a break in the middle of the week or something like that. So you kind of, one interesting thing which I've noticed, and maybe this will incentivize some people to want to give their team a 4-day week. Since I've started taking Fridays off, that Friday is my opportunity to be creative. But what's really interesting for me is a lot of my most creative ideas since I've started doing that happen on the Saturday morning. So I've had that day where I've not been, having to intellectually just focus on coaching and doing podcast interviews and like the day-to-day stuff within the business. and I give myself just flexibility, freedom to roam a little bit and just have a bit of fun and just be kind to myself, all of a sudden the brain just sort of naturally comes alive and starts to solve problems without me really thinking about it. So it does prove, if you give people that extra time off, that they probably will bring more creative ideas back into the business.
Absolutely. It's funny that, isn't it? Like, the more you think about a problem, the less likely you are to find the solution. Sometimes you just got to take a break, haven't you? Yeah, it's an interesting one.
I'm curious, though, David. I'm gonna have to probe you. So why do you feel you can't? What's stopping you from doing a 4-day week at the moment?
I don't know. Like, a decade and a half of conditioning in workplaces, maybe. I don't know. So, I mean, having said that, I am a lot more forgiving of myself if I just need to take a morning off and do nothing.
Yeah.
I don't schedule it. I don't have a day every week where it always happens. But I don't punish myself or feel guilty if I just need 4 hours off or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas in past jobs in earlier career, I mean, I never would have done that. I frequently worked ridiculous hours and was doing things at weekends and all sorts. And that was when it wasn't even my own business. So yeah, I mean, there's a work culture narrative emerging here, isn't there?
Well, a little bit. You've kind of trained yourself into that 9 to 5 by the sounds of it. And
it's just habit, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I think as well, you think since the Industrial Revolution, it's been a habit for all of the however many 6 generations that we've had since that age, or more possibly, I think. I can't remember what the maths are now. But the guilt-free time off for me, so it took me probably a good 2 to 3 years of practicing guilt-free time off. So your next challenge, David, if you're willing to accept it, would be to actually schedule a day in the next month or two where you do go and just do something really fun and nice for yourself. It will probably feel really uncomfortable, and it'll be fine now because you'll be like, yeah, Rob, I'll book it in, no problem. And then the closer and closer you get to it, and you'll have deadlines and think your to-do list will be, written out, and your emails will be dropping, and you think, oh, I got to really do with that day. And you'll get that tension starting to build up. But if you can follow, and I always say, encourage clients, especially when because this is one of our things, is when you're running a business, you want to, the dream business is doubly income with half the clients, because then you have far less work to do, but what you do have is a bit more time to deliver better quality results and outcomes for those clients. But also in doing so, you get paid a bit more, so you have a bit more freedom. Hopefully it takes you less time overall to deliver it. So don't just book the time off, but actually book an activity in, something is going to take you that's one of the reasons I'll go and book a massage, because I'm locked in a quiet room for at least 60 or 90 minutes. I have to drive there, so I'll listen to an audiobook or do something. By the time I get there and I've had the massage, I kind of feel I really should make the most of this time as well before I go and pick the kids up from school. So I'll stop and have a non-alcoholic beer or a cup of coffee or something, and then, go and pick the kids up. So sometimes giving the day a bit of structure, so you kind of get a bit preoccupied, especially as a man. I think you need something to do, basically. And then get just push through that sort of tension and that resistance which you're experiencing, and just go, no, this is part of the process of me learning to enjoy this as guilt-free time off, and figure out what that looks like to you. But for me, it was 3 years worth of practicing this before I got to a point where I'm like, no, it's not work-life balance. It's just about balance, and everything should integrate. I know it's not always practically possible, especially with people maybe who are listening who've got families and things like that. That's a whole different challenge. But if you can integrate everything just that little bit better, it does make life a bit more bearable.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, so I nearly never work at a weekend now, for example. So, I'm making progress. And the weird thing is, I've been doing this on my own now for over 5 years, which is longer than I was in my last job. And yet that habit, it's a weird one. It is weird. I'm fascinated by that sort of the human nature aspect of it as well.
It's just because it's been you think about your education, the education system is designed to drum this into you from the age of 5 or 4 in some cases. You're going to school 9 until 3:15 every single day. You do junior school to go and get a place at secondary school, maybe at a grammar school or something like that. You join secondary school and now you're working towards your SATs, GCSEs, A-levels. And what do they say after A-levels? You should go to university, because if you go to university, you'll get a good job. You know, get your maths and English A-levels or GCSEs, you get a good job. Now, I know that's not guaranteed in this day and age, and it's bloody expensive, let's be fair. You know, I was quite fortunate. I literally this year, I'm 43 and I've just finished paying off my student loan, believe it or not, right? And part of that is down to how I pay myself as a company director, because you can kind of skirt around the edges of, like, you know, the whatever the threshold is now for having to pay that back. But even still, it's been this liability which has been hanging over my head for the last 20 plus years. It's such a relief to know that I think there's like £300 or £400 left on there, which once my end of year's done, it will balance itself out. I'll make the final payment and I'm done. But I think about, would I have ended up in the same place if I hadn't have done that degree? Don't know. It's a sliding doors moment. If I'd spent that 4 years running a business, I did a couple of side hustles whilst I was at uni, but if I'd gone all in on a business and I was 4 years ahead of where I am now, and seeing this compounding effect that's happened over the last few years in my businesses, I'm like, well, I could have been, is there a chance I could have been up here instead? I mean, you never know. You kind of, there's some guesses there, but I would much rather have come out of university debt free, maybe with a bit of extra cash, so I could give myself a leg up, rather than walking out of it, which with, at the time, I think it was about 18 or 20,000 pounds worth of debt. You know, I think the education system is sending us on a bit of a merry dance, and entrepreneurship, like, has to be an option for people these days.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I've got pretty strong views about the education system in this country, and that whole, exactly, it's the hamster wheel, isn't it? It's exactly what you've described. Yeah, the what ifs are interesting as well. Like, so my first job, well, my first proper job, like, I did temping and things during uni. But in the interview, like, they asked a lot of questions about my degree. It was clearly important that I had it, even though it was completely irrelevant to the job. And I never used anything I'd learned in the process of gaining that degree in my actual career. And yet there was a very clear sense and a signal, I think, that if I didn't have the degree, I wouldn't have even been interviewed.
Yeah.
And I have an issue with that as well, because that shouldn't be a criteria when it's irrelevant. Like, this was for an admin job in an office in an aerospace consultancy firm. My degree was politics and international studies. Like, it's hard to think of something further apart. Maybe if I'd done an art subject, perhaps that would have been even further. But why was that a criteria?
Yeah.
Why did it matter? And, you know, and the argument I hear is, well, it's not about what the degree is. It's about they teach you how to think about things and about problem solving and critical thought and research and all of that. And it's like,
isn't that what you do when you've got a job?
Yeah, but also I feel like that's quite a thin pretext, because I didn't use any of those skills. And arguably wasn't taught them at uni either, quite frankly, on the degree I did. But
so a year or so ago, somebody came to me because they were kind of curious about, like, do they go, you know, down the career sort of route and get a job, or should they start up their own business? And I said, well, one, you could do both. There is a world where you can come do both, because a job at least gives you that financial security and that start jumping off point. You know, and a business you can build up gradually. It doesn't have to be, I think a lot of people, when they start a business up, they want to kind of go all in, and it has to make them, you know, 100, 200,000 pounds a year. And it has to like, oh, got a job. I couldn't possibly go and do that because it'll become a big distraction from, you know, me running my business and stuff. But if you start a business up and you're not too proud to accept a £10 note off somebody to do a small job, you know, cutting somebody's lawn or cleaning their windows or doing, you know, any of those sorts of things just to get started and learn a bit about business. But this person had decided that they actually were of the mindset if they wanted to go into a job, get a career, because they could learn about business there in a bigger business and then apply some of that if they wanted to later on. And for that particular job, there was two routes. It was go and get a university degree in order to get that job, or there was an apprenticeship option. And once they got over themselves that, you know, even as a 19-year-old, an apprenticeship isn't like, it's not like you're a teenager going onto a building site, you know, carrying like mortar for a brickie or something like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that at all either as a career. But I said to him, go and ask them if they would do a 3-month internship over the summer, because you can afford it. You're still at home with your parents. I said, tell them you'll do it for free and see if they'll give you a job off the back of that. And he's like, really? That's a thing? And I said, well, no, who made these rules that you have to have certain routes, pathways that you have to follow? So he did exactly that, proved his worth, got offered a 28k salary as a 19-year-old in this job, where he was getting paid more than people who'd got 4 years doing a degree coming in as graduates, because he showed them what he could do. And he was prepared to, again, give value up front. And, they did pay him a small amount, to cover his sort of travel and expenses and things like that, because I think they probably felt a bit bad. But the fact that he had that opportunity to prove himself. And I think, again, I remember with my agency, we always used to take apprentices into our agency. So 16 to 19 years old, we had about 7 apprentices come through. And they were brilliant because they were just they were like sponges, eager to learn. We did web design and branding, so they were like desperate to learn coding and geeks. And we used to have like game nights and stuff like that. It was great fun, outside of work and whatnot. And, I'm so proud of the fact that we were able to help these youngsters kind of develop into, a couple of them have got amazing careers now. One runs his own web design business, and he's been doing that for the last sort of 17 years now. Another one ended up going across to, I think it was Ecclesiastical or one of the big insurance companies outside Cheltenham. He's now heading up their programming department, their development department. He started in our little office in Stroud House in Stroud, in the basement, and he's worked himself up to this kind of lead developer role now, which is just incredible. I feel really proud of those sorts of things. And I think had we kind of looked at their CVs and looked at their qualifications and things like that, probably all 7 of those people we would have binned, because on paper there wasn't much there. But we were like, no, come in and chat. Here's a task, try it out, see how you go. There's no rights or wrongs here. Just want to see what your ethic is towards work. And, but there was one of them though, which I remember very fondly. It was a lovely guy, very entertaining in the office. And then one day, and this is a lesson, I think, for anybody who's starting out in business, you do also have to have a little bit of respect for your employer. He said he was going on a lad's holiday basically to Holland, and we're like, oh yeah, okay, come on, just be sensible, won't you? And then of course he doesn't show up on the Monday, and we're like, oh. Eventually I managed to get hold of his dad, and his dad's like, oh yeah, he's just feeling a bit sick, this, that, and the other. I'm like, come on, he's got to have enough responsibility that I wouldn't have minded if he'd booked Monday and Tuesday off as well, but he said he was going to be here, and he's not, and clearly he's obviously overdone it over the weekend. So I think it works on both sides. You can be, as an employer, I think you can be very much more flexible and give people opportunities. But I think also as an employee, you do have that responsibility to play the game as well.
I'm sure it was food poisoning. Yeah.
I think that's the excuse he used. But it's probably
We've all been there.
Cookies that he ate or something like that. I don't know.
I agree with you. I think that, alternative routes, because that kind of formal education approach, it's not for everyone. It's kind of like leadership and business and having that sort of 9-to-5 job versus being more of an entrepreneur and doing your own thing. It's, each to their own, I guess.
Yeah, that's it.
I totally agree with you, but I don't think schools and the education system even think about that. The closest we had was that young enterprise scheme. I don't know if you did that at your school, but even that, it was fun, but it was extra. So it was after school. It wasn't during lessons. I think we had to pay for it, and only 6 people in the year got the chance to do it. I say that. I think we were the only 6 who wanted to do it, but. Which maybe says more about our school than it does about anything else. But
even just the basics of the 4 pillars around health, wealth, relationships and happiness. The schools they have a responsibility, I feel, to at least start those conversations off. And I think it's easy. I think it is also easy to kind of point the finger at the education system and say, well, they should be teaching kids about mortgages and credit cards and investments and, various things like that. However, what if employers also took on that responsibility? Because they've got people within their organization that may be struggling with things like debt or gambling or drinking or challenges behind the scenes with their responsibilities. Kind of goes back to what we were talking about before. Maybe if an employer helped their staff to get better at managing their money, again, would that incentivize and motivate them to want to stick around? They'd certainly be happier, I would have thought.
Yeah, and you don't even have to do it. 'Cause immediately in my head, there's the liability thing. People are going to be worried about that, but you don't have to do it directly. So you mentioned about like coaching subscriptions or health insurance. I'm sure there are equivalent services for all of these other things as well. So just pay for that for them instead.
Well, there's money coaches out there, so get some and hire a few money coaches to come in and deliver some sessions. Lunch and learns. Because that you get, if that helps somebody to close the gap or get out of debt, and then all of a sudden they're happier. So again, Absolutely. It can only be a positive for the business, can't it?
Absolutely, and it's probably cheaper than the pay rise you don't want to give them, and it's definitely cheaper than the 200% or more of their salary that will cost you if they leave. So. Yeah, it feels like a no-brainer, but again, we're back to why aren't the big companies doing this? Some of them are, I think.
I think they are. I think they're getting a bit more savvy and a bit more holistic with their approach now. But yeah, we need more of them to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It should be the norm, not the exception. Absolutely. Well, we've not really got to any of the questions yet, but it's been an interesting conversation so far. I think we've probably covered quite a lot of the common mistakes that you see business owners making. I think we've covered that, at least in the big corporation setting, haven't we? There's a statistic going around, isn't there, that I think it's less than half of businesses will last 5 years. And there's a 30% one as well. I think that was 3 years, was it? Anyway, it's not a lot of companies in the UK anyway that will survive 5 years. The States have similar statistics. Why is it, do you think, that so many of them are failing?
It's actually, there's always going to be a multitude of different reasons, but the main one which I see, especially in the small business sector, is around lack of planning. I do a very simple process when I first start working with a client. I've always done it with all the business that I've worked with. It's basically it's like a 20-point health check. So it's like having a conversation with your mother-in-law. 20 questions, just asking about the state of play with your business. And the first question on it is about business plan. So can you grade your business plan on a scale of 1 to 10? And I've had thousands of businesses now take that. And it's about 75.5% of those businesses rate their business plan 4 or below. So it's substandard. 26% of those businesses rate their business plan 1 out of 10, which basically means it's non-existent. And you're kind of, it's a bit, I liken it to business planning. It's a bit like punching in the sat nav, and then it reverse engineers the most optimal route to get to that end destination. A business plan, I think a lot of people get very, I don't know what the word is, but they confuse business plans with things like investment documents and slide deck like presentations where you have to do 50 squillion pages with pretty diagrams and graphs and profit and loss accounts, cash flow forecasts and all this sort of stuff. The business plan can be really simple. And within about 5 or 6 questions, you can pretty much decide whether the business model you've designed is economically going to stack up. So I'll keep the numbers like super simple, but the way this works the same for businesses doing like under VAT threshold all the way up to hundreds of millions of pounds worth of revenue each year. It's just exactly the same process. It's just on a different scale. So the first question I always ask is, what is your financial goal for your business for over 12 months? So most common one I get for small business owners is 100K. I'd love to earn £100,000 a year. Great. So that's question number 1 done. That's it. Sometimes people are like, oh, I don't really know. Well, you need to know, because it's not like you would just get in your car and just drive like randomly. You could end up anywhere if you didn't have like sat nav or maps these days. So yes, we want to know precisely where it is that we're heading. Second question then is, so when you sell your product or service, on average, how much are you going to sell it for? And then they're immediately like, they'll go, oh, well, it depends, because it depends on who I sell it to, and it depends on this, that, and I'm like, well, I said the keyword is on average for a start. The second thing is, where you're saying it depends, it means there's too many variables in your business. So you're doing too many things for too many different types of people. You want to strip away some of that complexity, take out some of the variables, and get really good at doing one thing really well for one specific audience. So, and then at that point I go, okay, right. So that makes sense. So we're thinking about charging £1,000, say, for our product or our service. And then all we do, so we're only 3 questions in at this point, and this is our 4th question, is we take the big number and divide it by the little number. 100k divided by £1,000, that gives us our units of capacity that we've got to supply, is 100. And this is normally, I've done this in front of rooms full of people, just these 4 basic questions in the way that I've explained it here. And people's eyes pop out, of their heads or through their glasses, because they're like, oh my God, 100 clients. Like, I can't deliver to 100 clients. I don't have the capacity to be able to do that. Because it's very common in the small business community that we base our capacity on like working 5 days a week, 9 to 5, so 160 hours a month. But as a small business owner, you have more responsibilities. It's not just about delivering that product or service. You've got to do marketing and sales and admin and finance and picking the kids up from school and dropping them off, making their lunches, and also taking sick leave and having holidays. So ultimately, most small businesses only ever have the capacity to work maybe 2 to 3 days a week max in terms of paid work. The rest is all like admin and life admin. So then we start, and what we're looking at here is just basic supply and demand economics. And so we're on the supply side. Well, okay, if we can't deliver 100 units, if we don't have 100 units capacity, 5th question, what would be a realistic amount of capacity? How many clients could you work with this year? And they might say something like, well, 20 would be realistic. Okay, so question number 6, take the big number now, divide it by 20. And we end up with our product needs to be selling on average for 5k, not 1k. Again, eyes pop out of their heads because like, oh my God, I can never sell it for 5k. Who's going to buy it at 5k? Nobody will ever buy that. But all of a sudden, you need far fewer clients at 5k. There's 8 billion plus people on this planet. If you can't find 20 clients in a year to spend £5,000, we're doing something wrong. So let's design a product now that has like enough value for 5k. And the nice thing is as well, like when you put the price, I don't just recommend 5x in the price and doing nothing different. You've got extra resources available to you then to be able to stack a load of extra value in, which subsequently then gets better results for your clients. So it makes you more referable and there's more money on the back end. So putting your prices up is actually one of the best business decisions you can ever make. For most business owners, though, it's the scariest. They think all of their clients are going to run for the hills, and it just doesn't work like that. So supply side, right, 20 clients, 5k each, 100 grand. And then we can then shift gears over to the demand side of things. How do we stimulate enough demand to sell 20 clients? And there's some very basic metrics which came out of, there was a white paper, it started out as a white paper many years ago with Google called 0 Moments of Truth. And in ZMOT, they break down like with all of their gazillion bits of data at Google, they worked out like how long somebody needed to engage with your brand before they made a buying decision. And it's now this amazing like online learning portal. There's just so much information in there. But one of the headlines which I took out of it was that traditionally for a service client business, which is kind of where my expertise is now, these small one-person business owners building websites or doing coaching or bits of consulting. To get a client, you need to traditionally, it's about a 1 in 5 conversion rate. So you have to do 5 sales meetings, consultations in order to get that one client in. So now we can start to reverse engineer out demand. So we've got 20 clients we need, 1 in 5 conversion rate. So over the course of next year, we have to have 100 sales meetings or consultations. That's only 2 a week. It's two conversations a week. That's all it is. And then typically in order to get somebody booked into a sales meeting, you probably need to have conversations with 7 to 10 people who are kind of interested. So we're talking about to get those 100 consultations booked, maybe starting 700 conversations. And that could be, and that's very broad, right? So we're talking like somebody sees you put something on LinkedIn and they go, oh, David, that post you did about leadership, that's really interesting. Tell me more. And then you get into a conversation on LinkedIn and then maybe take it offline or offline virtual coffee, or you actually go for a real coffee. Imagine that. So it's like very simple, like high level conversations. That's all it is. And then we make the invitation to pull them into a consultation. So that's it. That's your 1-page business plan right there for like marketing, sales, and like fulfillment. And just so few business owners just go through that very simple thought process to design their business model. A couple of other things which kind of happen within that as well is like, especially with pricing. For me, like I've got very fixated on pricing over the last few years because you can make a pricing decision and 30 days later, you can see the results of that decision in your profit and loss account. There are very few other business decisions you can make that have such an immediate impact. Cost savings traditionally have about a 2 to 3 month lag time before, so if you're restructuring the workforce or, I don't know, maybe changing the production line, for example, or other efficiencies, it takes a while for those to bed in and then for you to actually see the benefits of it. But if you raise your prices and you do that today, you'll see an immediate impact on your top line and potentially bottom line as well. But the reason most people don't do it is because there are dumb rules. And I don't know who made these rules up, right? And here's an example. Who made up this dumb rule? You can only put your prices up, David, once a year, and maybe on January the 1st, and maybe by 5 or 10% if you're feeling really brave. Who made up that dumb rule, right? You can test prices a dozen times a year if you want to. You can sell something for £1,000 yesterday and £2,500 tomorrow if there's product market fit for the same product. And you can test that and see whether it works or not. And but the challenge is a lot of people when they're picking their prices, I get it where it's a more heavily commoditized product, like a tin of baked beans or something like that. And people are making those those sorts of rational decisions there. But for anybody listening who is in a service-based business, you have full flexibility to be able to test your pricing, to a point. Like the common mistake here is that people go and look at all their competitors. And it's like, Paul's looking at Davina's price, Davina's looking at Julia's price, Julia's looking at Dave's price, Dave's looking back at Paul's price. Now, which one of those four is an expert in pricing? I can guarantee none of them are, right? I am. David's got a better idea of pricing now, but they're all looking at each other. How do you know that they're not all losing money and you're about to copy a flawed business model? So we look at our competitors with a view to learning and understanding and seeing what they're doing, but we can't make the mistake is assuming they actually know what they're doing.
Yeah, and also, I mean, particularly with the sort of the one-person service-based approach, I mean, the odds of it being that you're comparing apples and apples versus apples and oranges are pretty slim, I would have thought, unless you're all just copying each other on everything, not just price.
Yeah, very much so. But you also don't know that like somebody's got a big office and an expensive car and things like that, and that's why they're maybe a bit more expensive. Or somebody's working out their back room, they've got no overheads because they've not invested in software or team or anything like that, and so that's why their prices are very low. So you've got to decide on kind of where you fit into the market and price accordingly. Price for profitability. It's remarkable how many businesses, and this is why. So the statistic is that 5% of businesses last until year 10. Okay. 10 years is a long time. I've run 2 businesses now, one for 12 years. I'm in my 9th year now with the coaching practice. I can't see myself doing anything different. So hopefully I brought the average up now with my 2 businesses and my now 3rd business as well. So I can see why businesses, we can already see why businesses don't last because, if you're not pricing for profitability and you've got no rainy day funds, and then all of a sudden an economic downturn happens, a Liz Truss jumps into power and kind of screws up the economy, whatever it might be, there's no buffer to get through that storm, weather the storm. So I'm very much about like, how can we create positive cash flow cycles in the business? That is so important. So taking something as simple as like, a consulting gig that is a 6-month consulting gig and you're going to charge, £3,000 for it. The traditional thing that most consultants would do at this point is take 3K, divide it by 6 and charge $500 a month for that. And the challenge with that though is even big businesses will treat that like a Netflix subscription. Because what they think they're buying is your time. They think they're buying your access for a month at a time, but for 6 months. And so things are really good, so they don't need your help anymore. So David, they say, goodbye, we don't need your help anymore. And we're on month 4 thinking, crikey, what am I going to do for the next 2 months? Or maybe they are making some cutbacks. Times have been hard, and consultants traditionally are the first ones to go. So now goodbye. We say goodbye to David because he's, month 4 in, because we don't need him for the other 2 months. We can't afford it. So what I encourage people to do is to sort of productize that. So if you wanted to anchor somebody into, say, £500 a month as like a retainer after that, what I normally recommend we do is you go, right, well, let's take 5 out of those 6 months at 500. So that's 2.5K. But what we'll actually do in month 1 is charge £1,500. So overall, the package then becomes 4K, not 3K, right? So the client is buying a 6-month piece of consulting work, and you have to clearly define what the outcome is going to be from that piece of work. You front load the cash with the £1,500 up front, and then the 5 installments at 500. And you obviously contract them into that. So they're paying 4K. It's just your vendor financing it to make it easier for them. So at month 4, if they decide to leave, well, actually you've collected your 3K already. But they should pay the other 2 because it's in the contract, right? So, but what we've created is this positive cash flow cycle, because we've got the £1,500 up front. It gives you extra resources to be able to, do that first piece of work for the client, do the plan and prep for it and get everything ready, hire in other people if you need to, and various other things like that. Whereas again, a lot of small business owners tend to be swayed by corporates like to do 60 and 90 and 120 day terms because it works in their favor, because they're creating positive cash flow for themselves, because they get to collect all this cash and wait 3 months before they then pay their suppliers. But as the supplier, it's down to you to choose your own terms, and it's down to you. If you want to play the game and wait 120 days, that's entirely a choice. But you can also, and I work with a lot of consultants, and I'm always like, first thing to do is go and renegotiate terms, because guaranteed there is a pot of cash there where they can pay up front for something. So positive cash flow, but also we can, get 7 and 14 day terms negotiated as well. That is feasible. And a lot of corporates are now working with their consultants, if they're good, to around their own personal terms. And the next thing then as well is like, this is my final point, actually, I'll say on sort of pricing and cash flow and things like that. You'll hear a lot of business owners, big and small, saying we have a cash flow problem, right? They don't. It's a lie, right? Because the money's flowing in, it's flowing straight back out again. So they don't have a cash flow problem. In fact, the cash is flowing really well, right? They've got 2 other problems. One is a making more money problem, and the second one is keeping that money problem. So we educate business owners, big and small, raise your prices, create positive cash flow cycles so we're bringing more money in up front. But then on the back end, let's not just get like really excited because we've got, 20 grand sat in the bank. We've got to go and spend it all because that's investing in our business, which you hear a lot of gurus and experts talk about. And I get it. You do need to invest some of that back into the business, but smart investment is also keeping 10K out of that 20K for a rainy day. And big and small businesses alike need to be really disciplined to make that happen, to get to a point where you've got maybe 3 to 6 months worth of your expenses, your salary and your operating overhead stored away in a wise bank account, earning you 4.2% interest, safe investment, right? So that if something happens to you, you've got that to fall back on, worst case scenario. Or if you get more money built up in that rainy day fund, you can then start to make some shrewd investments, maybe starting to think about sponsoring some events or getting a book authored. So, which is a big investment in its own right. So you've got a marketing asset that you can sort of hand out to people, or hire a PR agency that's going to get you speaking gigs so you can get more work from it. So these are very sensible investments to then make in your business.
Yeah, well, I've learned loads in that. So thank you. It's completely changed my perspective on pricing. We might have to have another conversation. I mean, it's an interesting one. So, I mean, the small business versus big business dynamic is something, I know I've struggled with in my current business as well. And there is this thing, like almost the terms don't matter some of the time because they won't pay you on time anyway. Especially if they know you're a lot smaller than they are. There's plenty there to learn. Like I could have another hour on that and be quite happy.
Well, maybe I'll come back and do a second episode when I'm not full of cold, and then we can have a chat about that. But I was going to share an example actually of this. So there was I've got leadership development coach actually in my cohort, a guy called Tom. He started out life doing sort of very typical sort of hourly rate, day rate type consulting work, coaching and training within organizations. And the reason he came to me was just because he was just so fed up of, like, it felt like a grind. It was constantly like sell, deliver, sell, deliver, sell, deliver. And the money it was good, but it was like a grind basically. And then, so we went through the program and we raised his rates, and we started to sort of focus on, it's called productizing services, where you kind of build packages basically for your offer and then price accordingly to that. And recently I got a sort of an SOS message in a WhatsApp saying, Rob, I've got this really big meeting coming up and I don't know how to like quote for it. Like, can you help? So we jumped on just a very short 10-minute turbo call, and chatting to Tom about sort of, essentially what they wanted to do was to do a whole sort of culture change over a period of 3 months within the organization. So it was a big piece of work, and it needed not just him, but associate coaches to come in and facilitate it. And I said, well, what are they hoping to achieve from this? Have you done what I recommended you do, and quiz them on their numbers and what outcomes they want, KPIs and actual, like, let's speak money here and get really specific about it. He said, yeah, absolutely. He said, well, probably what they're looking at is about £1.5 million in savings through, well-being, getting people back into the workplace. I was like, great. Would 10% of that be fair to invest in this project then? And he kind of silenced for a little bit on the phone. And he went, yeah, I think it would actually. Yeah. So I said, there's your price at 150K. And I silence again because he heard the big number. This is where a lot of consultants and coaches really struggle, because these big numbers can be quite scary, life-changing sums of money as well. And so he did. He went and negotiated with them, and they agreed on 110K, which was still huge in terms of what his projects have been at, for 3 months' work, and a majority of that paid in full in advance because they wanted Tom to do it, and so he was able to negotiate his terms. If you're a consultant on a beauty parade with 5 other consultants, you're playing their game. You're a pawn in their game of chess. If a business comes to you and they want you, you have the driving seat. And that's where, again, there are ways to kind of, again, we probably don't have time to go into it today, but there are ways to engineer, lead a conversation with authority so that you can swing the odds in your favor when it comes to kind of negotiating that. In actual fact, there's a fantastic book I'd recommend. It's called Never Split the Difference by an author called Chris Voss. And he was an FBI hostage negotiator. And some of the examples he uses in there, he gives some really practical examples for business owners to be able to negotiate, not just doing deals, corporate deals, but also managers working with their team and vice versa, people looking to get a leg up the corporate ladder and various things like that as well. How to actually go about, career progression the right way, as opposed to kind of, there's a bit of this kind of millennial Gen Z, entitlement, I think, going around at the moment. Well, I've been here for 2 years, therefore I should get it. But one of the things he puts in there is like, preempt it. Like, the art of negotiation is to be one step ahead. So a year before you anticipate you might be up for a promotion, go to your manager and say, what 3 things do you need me to do over the next 12 months to swing the odds in my favor to get that promotion? Do it. Go back 12 months later. Hey, look what I've done. Tick, tick, tick. I've done these 3 things. Can we talk about that, that promotion now?
Yeah, I quite like that. I'm not sure about the millennial and Gen Z entitlement bit, but I'm an old millennial, you see, so I always side with them.
I'm 1981, so I don't know how that. I think I'm just on the crossover of millennials.
Yeah, you're on the border. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. No, I mean, I like that idea as well. I wish I'd had that advice when I was going for promotions in my career. But
it's also the same thing with selling into corporate as a consultant, because you can, for the first thing I would do if I walked into, we used to do this in my old agency days, with bigger businesses when we were sort of building websites and doing marketing for them and things like that. First question I would ask, I didn't care whether I was on a beauty parade or presenting for like final pitch, but the first question I'd ask is, what's your procurement process? Who do I need to speak to in procurement to get on the supplier list?
Yeah.
And you get a few surprised looks, but I was like, this is part of the game. There's no point in you saying yes, and then I have to go through the rigmarole of me getting on the supplier list. But if I can get on the supplier list, I've just hedged my bets, because then when they go back and check whether I'm on the supplier list, I'm already on there. So it was the first question I always asked, and that got us a couple of gigs as well. And again, with there's I forget which book it was, but there was this story about a training company that Microsoft basically were like, they really wanted Microsoft as their main sort of client for this sending people into this training workshop, which they ran. But every year, Microsoft only ever sent like 10 delegates. And I wish I could remember who the company was that sold it. Every year they sent 10 delegates. So in the end, this person just ended up phoning up their procurement hotline basically and said, I've noticed that you only ever send 10 people to our workshop. Why is that? And the person goes through and hits buttons tapping, and they log into their system, and they say, well, the computer says we're only allowed to send 10 delegates. So the guy says, well, can you make that 1,000? And the person says, done. And then the next one comes along, and they've got like 560 people on it from Microsoft, right? Nice. So sometimes there is this thing around there's business is a bit of a game. You can have a bit of fun with it, and you could, if you put your mind to it, like if there's stuff you want to get out of it, figure it out, like super sleuth it, like reverse engineer the route to kind of get what you want out of a business. Especially selling into corporates, because they'll have systems and processes that can all be, for want of a better word, I can't think of a better word, but like humanly engineered, hacked, basically.
Yeah, I'm going to go and phone Microsoft after this, I think. Yeah. There's some great lessons there already for any aspiring business owners or current ones who might be in the audience. So thank you for sharing all of those. I feel like we should talk a bit more about leadership, though, before we run out of time. So I'm going to ask you then, what would you say is the biggest leadership lesson that you've learned from your career?
For me, managing other people, I mean, I know I've never... the most amount of people I've probably managed at any one particular point in time was 6.
Still counts.
But within, I mean, I suppose as well, within my community now, we've got 175 business owners. So I am a leader within that large community as well. The lesson I've learned is just not to micromanage people. You can be leaning over somebody's shoulder, like watching what they're doing. And now you've got 2 people doing the same job, basically. And one thing which I've had to learn, and actually this came through having children, believe it or not, this lesson, was patience. Like watching children learn, and I know adults are very different, but watching children learn, you have to learn a whole other level of patience, and also like curiosity to understand, like, I wonder why they're thinking about it like that way. And then you have that moment of like, right, now I get it. So you give people the space to be the freedom to be able to roam, and you give them a brief, but don't micromanage them. They can do some really amazing creative things, and you can actually learn a heck of a lot from it. So I still get that urge when somebody's like doing something that's not quite, I'm like, still want to kind of like, go in there and like, but I'm like, no, let's just, let them see what they can do. But I get a lot of anxiety now though, when because there are people who need to be micromanaged to be productive. They need to be told what to do. And I find that even more frustrating now, because I've learnt to like stop doing that. Just use your initiative, go and do it. And that's like, so it's both sides to that coin. But yeah, that's probably the biggest difference for me. And same with clients as well. Now this is as a service provider myself, as a coach. Recognizing that I'm working with adults and that they have their own responsibilities, and that if they choose to do something or not to do something, I can't make their problems my problems. And again, just a really simple example. So I'm speaking at an event in June. There's a cohort of people coming up. I've got a lot on my plate. So one of my team said, "Oh, listen, I'll sort out accommodation for some of the people coming up." I was like, fine, great. That's it. But I can see them managing it in the WhatsApp chat. And again, I'm like, it's not quite how I would do it. But I'm like, but I keep reminding myself, no, they're grown-ups. They can sort out their own accommodation. That's not my responsibility. My responsibility is to get my talk ready, get myself to Newcastle, deliver that, do a great job of delivering that talk, not to like be host to these, my clients. They are my clients. I have to recognize that, but they're also grown-ups. I think there's businesses need to kind of just trust their people a heck of a lot more.
Absolutely would agree with that. And I know what you mean from both sides of that micromanaging thing as well. And I think it's one of the bigger challenges, especially for people who are new to leadership, new to management, is accepting that just because they're not doing it the way I would do it doesn't mean they're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
But once you get over that hump, wow, I mean, your life will be completely changed.
Well, that's it. And I've got the second business, which I mentioned, Tate, who I trained him up in that in 2 weeks. I documented everything, how I was doing it. And I said, here you go, here's all the videos. We met up regularly. He learned the whole process within 2 weeks and just ran with it. But now we're talking like 6-7 months on. I get such a kick out of working with him because every time we meet up, he's like, oh, Rob, I've tried this, or I've got this new idea about that, or should we do this in the next month? And it's and he's only 24, and it's so wonderful to see him kind of leaning into that process now. But it's purely because I've given him full autonomy to run the business, and that responsibility, I think, like draws out extra creativity out of people.
Definitely, yeah, and they feel invested in it as well, which I think really helps too.
That's it.
Yeah, love that. Timing wise, we've got time maybe two more questions.
Two more questions. Yeah.
2 more questions. Now I have to choose one or two. I'm going to ask this one because it's always got an interesting answer. I mean, nearly always. You might buck the trend, but I'm sure you won't. What would you say has been, during your career so far, your best experience of being led?
Oh, great question. That's a really great question. So I had one of my coaching mentors. So I was a very introverted, like web designer, and loved nothing more than to kind of hide behind my computer way back when, and before I had family and stuff. When I stepped into coaching, there is this expectation that you have to show up in a different way. So you have to get onto podcasts, you have to speak on the stage, you have to do YouTube videos and stuff like that, all very like extroverted type activities. So I had to learn my way through all of that. One of my mentors, though, a guy called Nick, he ran a coaching, or was part of a coaching practice. It was bigger than a practice, really, big coaching organization. And he kind of had this monkey see, monkey do approach. So he took me out without telling me this is what was happening. He just said, oh, Rob, meet me here on this particular date. And, I'd done a bit of training with him anyway. Just going to go and show you a few things. I was like, okay, yeah, fine. And so we walk in together, and then 5 minutes away from the place, he's like, right, we're going into a sales meeting. I'm going to show you how to sell coaching. Right. Okay. And he did this twice to me. And then the third time, we're 5 minutes away, and he said, right, you see me do it twice now, Robin, it's your turn. You're going to do it. And I'm like, what? And he let me just run with it. And he taught me his 6-step sales process, and he showed me how to handle objections. And after those first 2, he sort of talked through the objections and whether he thought it went well or not and things like that, and asked me for my feedback on it. So I did the first 2, and it was really interesting. He then, the fifth one, he wanted me to observe somebody else doing the similar process. And I remember we walked in, it was, this person was incredibly confident, and I'm going to give the game away. I didn't want to. It's not about genders or anything like that. Although I've made it about that now. But she walks in very confident. She does a great job of the sales pitch. Everything's going swimmingly. And then what happened was the CEO of that company walked all 3 of us to the elevator and then down the lift and out to the front door of the building. But in the lift on the way, and I'd just been quietly observing. I hadn't had to say anything throughout the whole thing. And lift's going down, and he says to the woman who'd been leading the sales meeting, "God, it went well, didn't it? Like, what plans have you got for the weekend?" And everybody's like really buoyant. It's a Friday, and she said, "I'm going to go and get a bottle of bubbly and go out with the girls and get absolutely smashed." And we get out of the lift and say our goodbyes and stuff like that. And Nick turns around to me and he says, "What was your assessment of the situation?" I said, "Well, Nick, I think we've possibly lost that deal." And he's like, "I think you might be right, Robin. Why was that?" And I said, "Well, hate to say it, but what she said in the lift coming down, like the last thing that a company wants to know is that their money's going to be spent on like bottles of champagne, people getting drunk. It just didn't seem really, and he's like, yep, bang on. Sure enough, the Monday comes around, get an email from them saying, sorry, it's a no-go. We're not going to go ahead. Felt that you were unprofessional, basically. But so in answer to your question, there was, again, it was like free reign just to be able to go out and learn it, do it, see it out in the wild. And then I got to lead my own ones. But Nick was just very trusting of me to get, these clients weren't, one of the deals that I watched Nick close was like a £9 million coaching contract. 9 million. And he's putting me in the room with similar sorts of caliber people to sell coaching for his business. So there's a huge amount of trust, I think, that was involved there.
Absolutely. But then I think as a leader, you've got to give trust to get trust, I think. I mean, the champagne story is an interesting one as well. Like, it's one of those things where I wish that sort of thing wasn't relevant, because who really cares what you do with your own time when you're not there, as long as you're delivering. And that professionalism word as well, I find that so distasteful.
Yeah.
But then the reality is that is how a lot of companies think. And so if you're in front of one of those companies, you probably don't want to do things like that.
Yeah, it's
so
a time and a place. It's simple again, but she's just a bit young, naive, probably didn't think about it at the time, but yeah.
I mean, again, we've all done it. We've all made that mistake. And it's, I don't know. It's still one of those things where I understand why it is a thing, but I wish it wasn't.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, well, I'm losing track of time again. I've got time for one more question, I hope, because there's one that I haven't asked yet that everyone has to answer. It's not optional, sorry.
Okay.
So that one is leadership heroes.
Leadership heroes.
So if you had to pick one person, and it could be anyone you like, they could be alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, but it has to be someone who, in your opinion, perfectly embodies leadership. So who would that person be for you, and why?
Great question. So it's a guy called John who coaches my eldest daughter swimming, and he is just... I'm going to get quite a bit emotional, actually, because it's obviously when you have kids who swim and do sports and stuff, there's quite a lot of emotion kind of involved in the process. But John is like, he is like so dedicated to those kids, and it's not about the results and things like that. Fortunate Poppy's made it up to county championships, and she's even qualified for regionals in a couple of events as well. But John's whole ethos is around like making sure they have fun, that the club has this community spirit. On some of the training sessions, they have music blaring out of a speaker, which some of the girls in the senior squad bought for him as like a gift at the end of the season. He makes it so inclusive, not just for the kids, but for the parents, for the new kids coming through into the junior development side of the squad as well. I just think he and it's all done. There are times when he is a bit harder on the children as well, because they do need that discipline, but it's just so incredibly balanced the way that he's like the head coach. He manages like 120 kids across the club. So he's got a lot of responsibility, but everything that I've seen of him, it's just so measured, so balanced, and like very nurturing. Very inspired by John.
Great story. Bonus points because, of course, no one else has picked him before as well. So
there you go.
Done.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you hear the horror stories, don't you, about kids' sports in particular, about like how they take all the fun out of it, becomes super serious, and like stress and burnout before they're even teenagers, and it's just horrible.
Yeah.
So it's nice to hear the opposite story for a change.
Yeah, no, it's all about friendships and fun at the swimming club. It's great.
Yeah, which it should be when you're a kid, because that's the whole point of life at that age, in my opinion. Yeah. Well, Robin, thank you so much for your time today. I've got a half a question left for you, which is if anyone wants to learn more about you, what you do, perhaps work with you, get a copy of the book even, where can they go? What's the address? What are the links?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got some signed copies of Take Your Shot, my book, which are ready and need homes. So if anybody would like a copy of those, then head on over to fearless.biz/TYS for Take Your Shot. And like I take great pride in signing those and sending them out to people. And then also, if you've enjoyed the content, I've got, I'm in the process of putting out weekly videos on my YouTube channel as well, talking around some of these topics around productization and sales and marketing, pricing and things like that too. So, that if you just jump onto, well, hopefully we'll share the links somewhere. But if you just search for Robin Waite on YouTube with an E on the end of Waite, you should be able to find me as well.
Perfect. Yes, the links will be in the show notes down below, so everyone can find them easily. Well, that's it. That's more than we've got time for. So yeah, thanks again so much for being so generous with your time as well.
Oh, my pleasure, David. Thank you.
Well, I know I've said it already, but I'm going to say it again. Thank you, Robin, for your time today, for sharing those stories, those insights into business, leadership, and more. Listener or viewer, if you're with us on YouTube or Spotify today, I do encourage you, as I do every week, click on that link in the show notes, get a free copy of that book. It may just push you over that latest obstacle. You may find it helpful. And if you're looking for support on your leadership journey, do pay a visit to my website as well. It's www.leadingwithintegrity.co.uk. Come and join us at the Integrity Leaders community. Get access to that kind of supportive environment that many leaders are missing out on, as well as a whole wealth of leadership resources and tools, and even a couple of courses on there now as well. All of that and more at the website. Hit that big green button when you get there. It'll take you to the sign up page. Choose whichever of the 3 membership tiers most suits you. And if you have any questions, my LinkedIn profile is also in the show notes, so drop me a DM if you like. Or that sign up page also has a link direct to my calendar, so you can just book a phone call if you prefer. That's all I've got time for today. Thank you again for being with us today. I hope you'll be back next week. And until then, get to work on that business plan. And as always, be a leader, not a boss.